So, for, I guess, the past 6 weeks, I've been working on 3 collective works. Well, really, I've been working on one work, found the second one by chance, and the third one has been around since 2019, but really since, 1992. So, we have 3 works. One which is one of the strangest, most interesting, most complex conversations of my life. One which is a talk that I gave, where the audio is still public, although I may remove the audio, probably replace it with this audio. And the third is a story that I've been trying to tell for, well, since 1992. So, these 3 works have all, well, really one of the 3 works has required a good amount of my time in the past 6 weeks. One of the works has just been there since, well, at least 2019, but not actually out there. And one of them has been around for quite a few years that I should have been focusing on, but obviously my focus has been with regards to other things, particularly after the situation that I found myself in with regards to my kind of collective simulation works in around 2015. So now these things total about, well more than 60,000 words in total, and I need to work through what it'll take to actually get these things potentially self-published in England. So, I've not been recording podcasts in recent weeks because I've had other things that have taken my time. And I've also gotten to an interesting state with regards to Model Rail Radio because while I thoroughly enjoy the podcast and going to continue the podcast, there was a problem in the format with regards to some of the participants. And my hope is I've changed perhaps some of that, cleared out some of the participants, but also Model Rail Radio has become something very different since COVID. And I still need to think about what actually a change in format means with regards to these things, particularly because obviously my daughters are taking some of my time too. So, what does this mean in the near term? Well, it means probably My Rules Are Better is going to probably stay roughly the same, given one of the works is Just Plain Chaos, actually the fictional Just Plain Chaos work. Well, it's hardly fictional, it's actually a story. And I think that podcast is probably going to stay somewhat the same, or at least it's going to change a little bit associated with my kind of ongoing thinking with that. Model Rail Radio will probably stick in something similar to the format it has been for at least the past 2 years, and we then have Long Funk. So my view would be Long Funk will continue in the form that it's had for the past how many years, and yeah, that is the way the podcasts will go. I think My Rules Are Better is, I don't know, it's not a podcast that's trying to discover itself. It's a podcast that has a very defined format that I'm just looking to maintain and improve in the next, 4 to 6 months. And I got an email through the week from Barney Dicker's Kickstarter-esque thing, saying that there had been some progress made there, so no doubt we'll probably have to have Barney back on, and I want to thank Matthew Gibson for continuing to listen to My Rules Are Better, and I sent him a photograph of a dragon through the week, which was just wonderful. It was wonderful hearing from Matthew again, because certainly, if anything can describe the past few months, it is more associated with a feeling of immense isolation or just losing contact with people. And this is a phenomena which I've found recently with regards to the republishing, or not really republishing, but certainly publishing a podcast in Attic Aficionados to give a round out to that discussion, and also rediscovering that the Biota podcast has a group of listeners that have been languishing and actually worked through a series of permutations and mistakes, which have created, I guess, a very refined version of Biota podcast listenership. Now, obviously, the Biota podcast is no more in some regard, but I continue to develop artificial life, and in terms of football hooligan simulation, I seem to be now, I'm continuing to carry the gauntlet, the tattered broken bottle or brick or whatever the football hooligan simulation mantle is, because it is indeed a very refined thing that very few people are actually continuing to do. But I seem to be continuing to do it, and that is what it is. And with regards to London 1940, this is what has come through probably the past, 2, maybe 3 years worth of work. But I think, the development of that has reached not a stagnation point, but just a point of reflection. And to be frank, I haven't done much work on that because I've been working on the Ape SDK for the past 6 weeks as well. So, I am doing a meeting with what's called the 20th Century Society, which is a British independent society associated with the maintenance of later than 1918 architecture, which hopefully in terms of the architecture of London will be representative in London 1940. And I restarted SimCline as well, because actually the work in London 1940 that really interested me was the C-Line related work, which moves back into the Second World War and the Waffen-SS and the Luftwaffe and all this other interesting, curious, rather detailed stuff that I've become not necessarily an expert on, but overly knowledgeable in the past 6 months to a year. So, what will this look like in the coming few months? Well, as might have been noted in terms of these podcasts, I've taken a necessary break in order to work on this text. Now the text is done and includes actually quite a detailed section. The GUI center, let us say, of the text relates very specifically to a talk that I gave about my simulation work back in the past, which I don't think has really ever been promoted. And the whole thing is rather curious, actually, with regards to these 3 collective works, because collectively I've never promoted any of them, but altogether I think they represent the gestalt. They are more than the sum of its parts, which in of itself is rather curious. So now that is something that is just fermenting off to one side for when my wife can have a conversation with me about how I'm actually going to self-publish this thing in England, what the budget will be and things like that. I'm returning to recording a podcast to say, hello, I'm still here. I'm still recording podcasts. I'm still thinking. I'm still actively doing development. And I'd like to hear from you folk, because certainly what I've found in the Biota podcast rediscovery, or at least that the Biota podcast still has a group of listeners that are long-suffering, let's just call them what they are, that, these kind of collective podcasts probably need. And look, if you are subscribed to one of my podcasts, you might like another one of my podcasts as well, which was one of the things I was thinking about, that I have such a refined group of listeners currently that I need to almost consider cross-promoting my podcasts in some real sense so people can find the kind of audio content that they've looked for, or at least I hope enjoyed over the past few years with me. So thank you very much for persisting. And my hope is that these collective works will be available sometime, well, maybe not by the end of the year, but we'll have to see when it comes together, and then I'll be able to talk about them in another podcast, hopefully. And thank you very much in particular to the Biota podcast audience for sticking in there, hanging in there. And thanks to the folks that have heard some of the audio that apparently went into some of the Biota feed, but not others of the Biota feed, and there seem to be at least 3 distinct separate feeds. So I'm not sure whether the Apple feed is the primary feed. I'm certainly going to treat it as the primary feed for the Biota podcast going forward. So that's certainly been my past 6 weeks in a kind of editorial fashion. And thank you very much for tuning into my podcasts here in a simulcast form. Tom Barbalet in Las Vegas, Nevada, signing out.